Local 12 Newsmakers. Few local failures are more fascinating or more misunderstood than the story of Cincinnati's rapid transit system. Colorful stories about why the subway portion of the system lies silent under Central Parkway abound, but few people have bothered to check those stories against the historical record. Every 6 months or so, someone projects a vision of how the subway fragment could be put to a practical use in the future, usually with little understanding of what survives. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. The stories we tell about ourselves often reveal more about the society today and the people who are telling them than it does about historical reality. Cincinnatians who have been in a discouraging funk for decades love to quote Mark Twain about how everything is 20 years late here, even though no one can point to the original quote. We repeat the common wisdom that our love of steamboats in the 1850s blinded us to the potential of railroads in the 1850s, allowing Chicago to overtake us. The problem is it isn't true. And we love to tell stories and jokes about Cincinnati's unfinished subway that often begin those stupid Cincinnatians. The problem, very few people have bothered to check the complex economic, social, and political story that lies behind the Cincinnati rapid transit system and the subway that was one portion of the system. A new book, Cincinnati's Incomplete Subway, The Complete History, is the first attempt to tell the story systematically in a readable format. I am joined this morning by author Jake Mecklenborg, a photojournalist and graphic designer who got plunged into this story because you wanted to see it, right? You wanted to see it through your camera?
That's correct, right, and that was about 10 years ago. Fast forward now to last year, and I received an email one day, and someone asked, "Do you want to write a book on the subway?" And I said, "Not really," and not really. And but then when I saw the quality of the printing and so on they can do with the new books, I saw it as something that was going to be a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah, and as a person who's not trained in history, you really plunged into the real documents, and you went back and you read all of the documentation, and there is a host of documentation about this project.
Right, and it's scattered all over the place. It's scattered throughout about 5 different libraries in town, and I started the research by reading papers up at UC that students had written over the past 70 years on it, and then I used their bibliographies and went from there. That's where I started.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the world of historians. Stuff is scattered all over the place. Let's just begin with a little bit of background about the rapid transit system, because first off, it wasn't completely a subway, right?
That's right. Like most quote-unquote subway systems, the majority of it was to be above ground.
Okay. And how much is underground in the original?
I think it was about 3 miles total.
Yeah.
Right.
So if we take a look at a map, we've got a map that we can put up here. The underground portion is really getting people out of the downtown area.
Right.
And then once you're out of that, when you're in Brighton or again when you're in Northside, then it's above ground.
Right.
And it was supposed to be this loop that went originally conceived as this loop that went all the way around.
Right, and in the book I explained it actually started as 2 different lines. The concept started as 2 different lines which came so close to each other in the Norwood area they just connected it, and then politically you can say it's a loop, just like how 275 is a loop, and then even though 275 doesn't lead to anywhere, everybody sort of can understand the fact that it's a loop and it's sort of equitable to everyone.
Well, and the thing about when we understand perfectly about beltways with expressway systems, they define development and have completely transformed communities all over the United States. So this loop, the rapid transit loop, the other thing that I think is hard for people to understand, it was all predicated on facilitating the interurban system and its access to the downtown as well. And that's a whole set of transportation elements that simply don't exist, and most people don't recognize them at all anymore.
They have no knowledge of it whatsoever. They're not aware that we had 9 suburban railroads, which were all electric, which traveled out in all directions, and the idea was to be able to develop the interior parts of the county and have those lines come right into downtown. Previously, they had to stop in outer areas, so there they actually transferred to streetcars for a slow ride into town.
Yeah, and then once you're on a streetcar, you have to stop at every corner.
Right.
It's a completely different system. So basically, it was more like trying to figure out a light rail system, but using it in a different way. So what happens to those interurbans?
They all went out of business starting in the early 1920s, and the last one went out of business in 1938. So part of the ridership for the rapid transit loop was gone, and it was gone permanently. There was no public ownership of public transportation at that time. They were still all private companies, even the streetcar companies. So there was no way for the city to then go and buy those tracks and prevent them from being paved over.
One of the key things about this story, and we can't get into, I don't want to, people need to go out and read the book. I don't want to take the book away from people reading it, but one of the key things is the role that World War I played in this.
Certainly.
The bond issue, the $6 million bond issue, is passed before World War I.
Right.
Then what happens?
Because all the warring powers sold their gold, it caused an inflation deflation of the cost of gold, and so because the U.S. currency was still tied to gold, then the U.S. dollars became worth less money. So instantly, and through no fault of our own, the cost of the subway system doubled. And because of that, they actually were able to start and build about a little bit over half of it, but they were going to have to, from the very beginning, go back to voters at some point and get more money.
And that's always a problem.
And that's always a problem, and in this case, it was an extreme problem because government changed completely and permanently in Cincinnati during that time.
And let me get to that in a minute. But so the whole point about the funding of this and the impact of World War I mean, I've seen in one of the reports, I think it's the Beeler report after the fact, you know, a yard of concrete, a ton of steel. I mean, everything doubles right off the top.
Right.
And so, and then also, this project was just about to get started in the fall of 1917 when the war breaks out. And your point about federal government comes in and says you can't bond anything. Municipal bonds we don't want anybody doing those.
That's right. And you see throughout the project that state and federal law keep interfering with what Cincinnati wanted to do. So, you know, we still have that issue today, of course. We'll talk about that in a second.
With streetcar, with all sorts of
yeah.
things. But because of the reduction of funds available, the cost had gone up. One of the key decisions early on was to eliminate the proposal to take the line all the way down to Fountain Square and to stop it up on Central Parkway, which cuts it off from the center of town.
And that was a big deal because back then downtowns could move, and that sounds like an absurd idea, but the center of downtowns across America shifted a few blocks here, a few blocks there. Well, people lost their shirts, and other people made a lot of money because downtown then was recentered where they were. For example, in New York City, Midtown didn't really take off until Grand Central and Penn Station were in, to the detriment of downtown Wall Street area of New York. If this thing had been built and put into operation, only going to Central Parkway, there was the thought that downtown was going to shift from Fountain Square up the Central Parkway, and obviously the people that owned property around Fountain Square didn't want that to happen.
And of course, going back to 1907 and the Kessler report about the idea of Central Parkway, there was a vision that Cincinnati's downtown would progressively move north. And the fact that Shillito's was on 7th Street and not on 4th Street, and a little bit too far north. I mean, all of those factors, you know, you weave this together very, very nicely in terms of how that all is interplaying and whose interest. Let's talk about the political side of this. So after World War I, the canal is finally drained, construction starts, and we've got some construction photos that we can show people. Basically in the old canal bed, the deepened canal bed, and they did the construction. By the way, before we get to the political part, what can you say about the construction? Was this a good job, or was this a sloppy job in terms of the design and construction?
Well, it was actually a very simple project. That's part of the reason why it was even politically viable, was that the cost of it was very low compared to other subway systems around the country that were being proposed or had just been built. The tunnel that you see right here is actually built for specs of the era's freight and passenger trains, not just rapid transit trains. So there was this future possibility to actually use it as an entrance to a Union Station, which was also a very dangerous idea. The construction quality itself, it's obviously still here 90 years later, so it was built fairly well.
And the thing that I always point out to people is that if it wasn't being maintained and it wasn't essentially well built, Central Parkway would collapse.
And that's why they have to maintain it, by the way.
Right, so. Absolutely. So now the political side. So this is started after World War I. This is a period of a lot of turmoil. There's a great change in the city's political leadership from the fall of 1923 to the fall of 1925. And with the emergence of the Charter Party, which was a reform party, which oddly enough we still have with us, counters American political experience in most places. But so the Charterites come in. What's the Charter's approach on this, and particularly Murray Seasongood, the first mayor under the Charter?
The actual campaign for the Charter reforms didn't focus on the subway or stopping the subway. Once they were in control, the Rapid Transit Commission was something that they couldn't control, and so they sort of picked this sort of fake political fight with the Rapid Transit Commission and blamed everything on them for the condition of it and purposely stalled the project. And they said it's the wrong kind of subway in the wrong place. We should have been building a streetcar subway, for example. So what they did was they introduced all kinds of confusion, and by the end of 4 years of Murray Seasongood being in office, no one could remember why the project actually started. They had introduced so much myth, so much inaccuracy that people were actually convinced that it was built poorly, for example, that the dimensions were wrong, all these sorts of things that you still hear today, which is actually really incredible.
And those are just the dimensions being wrong. Right. Those are the stories I grew up with.
Right.
The dimensions were all wrong. They couldn't find a car that fit inside. They couldn't find a car that would stay on the tracks. All of that's a lie.
And that's absurd because it was actually built larger to larger dimensions than most subway tunnels. And number two, the stuff's custom built anyway, so it's a non-issue.
Right. So what comes in here is politicians, in this case the Charterites and Murray Seasongood, use this as a way to hammer home on the difference between themselves and the old political organization they had displaced and blaming everything on them.
I mean, the Cox regime absolutely was corrupt. Was this project specifically corrupt? I don't think so, and the reason is because a corrupt administration has to occasionally do something that everyone can agree is a nice thing to do. So they build parks, or they build monuments. In Cincinnati's case, they started General Hospital, and they built this. And the waterworks also.
And the waterworks, which is absolutely key. I want to jump way ahead because of time. What do you, in doing this, at the time that there's all this discussion about a streetcar system being introduced into Cincinnati, modern streetcar system being introduced into Cincinnati, what sort of lessons do you think can be drawn? How does that frame that discussion for you?
Boy, it's frustrating to see events unfolding here where people are attempting to do the same thing again, where they are attempting to allow a project to begin and to keep muddying the debate at every opportunity, and they want nothing more than for construction to start on the Cincinnati streetcar that's been planned since 2002, in fact, not just since 2007, going all the way back to Metro Moves. And they want it to start and to stop it, and they want to have streetcars that have no tracks to run on, or they want tracks on some blocks but not others, because it would be a terrific political embarrassment for whoever they decide to place that embarrassment on.
So you see the political side of the story having echoes today.
Absolutely, and in fact, when they call into talk radio, they always bring up the subway every single time. So the subway haunts us still with its use for anti-city agitators.
Jake, I want to, again, thank you, but then recommend that people get a hold of the book, Cincinnati's Incomplete Subway, the complete history. It is really a well-done book and deserves reading, especially right now because of the discussions going on. Thanks for being here this morning.
Thanks so much.
Stay tuned.